News, weather, travel and sport.
And call Lembit 0800 756 1111.
BBC Radio Kent.
It's all here.
Do you know the difference between a leasehold and a freehold? And is a leaseholder property still better than no property at all? 0800 756 1111. Why do I ask the question? Because the vast majority of homeowners who bought a leasehold house now regret it, according to a new report, and many feel that they were missold it, and some are struggling to sell up. Leasehold holders can find themselves paying lots and lots of costs, or if the lease is nearly up, then having a worthless home. The National Association of Estate Agents Property Mark found more than half of homeowners said that they did not realise what being a homeowner with a lease really meant until they bought the property. Now, the government has previously said developers have been increasingly selling houses on leasehold terms, adding to buyers' costs. But what problems have you faced with a leasehold property? Maybe you have a freehold, maybe you converted from leasehold to freehold. How much does it cost to maintain a lease? Would you buy a leasehold again? Was lease your only option? Or are you just lucky to have a property at all in today's housing market? Has property ownership become a luxury? I want to know your experiences. What did you pay for your property? That's sometimes interesting as a figure. Whatever your views on this, leasehold, freehold, and whether property is a luxury, here's the number, 0800 756 1111. You can text me on 81333, start your text with the word Kent. You can email me at lembit@bbc.co.uk. Give me a call. That's the question this morning. Is a leasehold property better than no property at all? Or perhaps a leasehold feels a bit like a rip-off on the basis that you buy a property and you've sort of rented it in a way, even though you're paying the mortgage. Maybe you've only got a few years left on it. Maybe you really regret spending the money because you've paid the mortgage and now you've got some other huge cost coming to you again. Some have said that this is an arcane system which owes more to the past than 21st century Britain. I want to know your views. Maybe you own many leases and you think that's an entirely legitimate way to make money. I'd like to know your views. And perhaps you feel that property should never really be owned, land should never be owned by people. Maybe we should all be on leasehold because the land belongs to the people. That's a legitimate political position held by the old Liberal Party, perhaps the new one as well, or the Lib Dems, but certainly the old Liberal Party had that view, and the Conservatives had a different view. So there is some historical precedent on this. But the question for you is, what's it like to be a leaseholder? Do you regret doing it? Did you realise the implications? Maybe you've turned your leasehold into a freehold. How much did it cost? Did you resent the extra money? Let's speak to Peter in Maidstone next. Peter, good morning.
Good morning.
What's your view about this?
Well, firstly, I suppose I'd say if I had the choice all over again, I wouldn't buy leasehold again.
You did buy leasehold, did you?
No, I bought a leasehold flat. And I understand the difference between leasehold and freehold, that we don't own the land that we're sitting on. What I didn't appreciate was that the freeholder has many, many powers that I never even began to realise. For example, they dictate who the management agent is for your block of flats. In our case, we had a particularly bad management agent who were ripping us off left, right and centre.
Let's go back to the beginning here. You say that you know the difference between a leasehold and a freehold. According to the survey by Property Mark, most people don't. So in simple terms, if you can, Peter, I know I'm using you to get something for nothing. Apologies for that. But
okay.
How would you describe the difference between being a leaseholder and a freeholder?
Well, the basic difference, as I understand it, is a freeholder, you buy a property and you buy the land upon which it stands. Being a leaseholder, you buy a property, but you do not own the land on which it stands. That is owned by a freeholder.
So if I owned 32 Arcacia Avenue, the whole of the building, it had 3 flats in it, and I sold one to you as a leaseholder, and the other 2 as leaseholders, then I'd still own the land, but you'd own the property.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So I've got that. Then now you said therefore that I, as your leasehold owner, can appoint a management company or organisation. What does that mean?
Well, first of all, you can charge a ground rent. whatever you happen to nominate, you could charge me a rent for having my property on your land. The second bit is that depending on the way the lease is drawn up, the freeholder is responsible for the overall maintenance of the site. And for that, he will probably appoint a management agent, which is pretty big business these days. The management agent then undertakes all the works on behalf of the freeholder. The leaseholders then are charged sometimes quarterly in arrears, sometimes quarterly in advance, usually in arrears, for all the work that's been done on the site during that quarter. Now, this, under normal circumstances, should be a fairly straightforward business, but you do get an awful lot of what I would call very, very bad, if not rogue, management agents. In our particular case, we got a particularly bad management agent who, for example, were charging us for things that weren't ever done.
So is the freeholder allowed... I know you didn't come on as a professional property consultant, but it's too good of an opportunity to not take up with you, Peter. If I'm your freeholder and you're my leaseholder, am I allowed to make a profit out of the leasehold?
Oh, yes.
So I could charge you... If it's costing me 2,000, I could charge you 8 or 10.
You can charge me within reason, I suppose, whatever you like, as a ground rent. In other words, the rent I pay you for having my property on your land. That's basically it. You can also, as is the case with us, when for example, most properties were originally sold on a 99-year lease. When that lease gets to around about 50, sometimes even more, 60, 70 years left on the lease, the property becomes less saleable because there's precious little time left on the lease. If you get to about 40 years on the lease, it's unmortgageable because the banks and the building societies won't mortgage a leasehold property with about 40, 45 years on the lease. So it's unmortgageable, therefore it's unsaleable unless you get a cash buyer. And in many cases, I don't have any figures, but in many cases the cash buyers end up being councils or local authorities who buy the properties and rent them out. In our case of 99 flats, we have approximately 70% that are rented out, and about 30% that are owner-occupied.
So that's, by the way, you should go into property guidance because you're doing a great job of this, Peter. So that explains the situation. And now tell us about your experiences.
Our experiences here, well, I purchased my flat about just under 4 years ago, and there was no real problem at the time. Then the freeholder decided to sell the freehold. The freehold was purchased by a large London company, and they then put in their own management company to manage the site. This management company started to give us inordinately high maintenance charge bills. And in most of the cases, they didn't give us any breakdown on how these bills arose. So maybe foolhardily, I started to react against this. In other words, querying the bills and querying their methods. And within a short space of time, luckily I managed to get 3 or 4 very, very good people around me who were of a like mind, and we took on the management company, and we started querying all their bills. If I give you one example, our gardening, they used to pay the gardeners £780 per visit. That's every fortnight. The gardeners came down from Enfield in Middlesex. We have subsequently managed, after nearly 2 years of fighting, to get the gardeners changed to a local company who charges £200 per visit, saving us £580 a visit. You multiply that by several visits a year, that's a lot of money.
Did the property company thank you for this?
No.
Did they cut the price? Did they cut the cost to you?
Well, it cut the cost to us because we eventually, after many, many months of wrangling and arguing, we managed to get them to change from their nominated gardening company to our nominated gardening company, thus saving us money. Very, very roughly, without going into great detail, if I tell you that in one 12-month period, our little group, if you like, we saved the residents of our block of flats £73,000 in overcharged bills.
About £700 or £800 per flat, then, if you said the 99.
About £730 per flat.
That's extraordinary. Yeah. You know what you should be doing, Peter? You should be running your own property management company. I'm
retired. I'm too old for that.
You've got the time. You've got the time to do. You've certainly got the capability, by the sound of it.
I've got the time. Yes. No, I'm just a fighter. I hate injustice, and where I see it, I'll fight it. And in our case here, these flats, not only was it costing us a fortune, but it was totally unjust. So I took it on and fought it.
With what you know now, would you buy freehold instead of leasehold? Because it sounds to me, being a
100%.
Being a leaseholder, by the way, I recognise something of what you say because I'm a leaseholder. It sounds to me that as a leaseholder, you're almost a bit of a rentnik. You're like 1/5 a rentee, really,
yes.
A renter.
Yes, because not only do you have to comply with what I've told you already, if you wish to do alterations to your property, even internal alterations, you, strictly speaking, have to get the permission of the freeholder to make any alterations to your flat. And yet you've purchased the flat. They own the land, but according to most leases, you have to get their permission to do any alterations.
If only we'd been speaking 21 years ago, Peter, I might have made a different decision. Where were you? Where were you 21 years ago? I needed you.
I wasn't here. I had a freehold property.
Well, in that case, we're both in the same boat now.
Yeah.
Peter, thanks very much.
No, I would never, ever buy a leasehold property again. That's purely personal.
Peter,
I might add, for those listening who are in a similar position, we had three options, or we had two options, basically. We could go to tribunal, which originally was designed as a quick and easy way to people to get things like this resolved. It's got to the stage now where going to a tribunal costs an absolute fortune because 9 times out of 10, the big property companies can afford top lawyers and stuff. And so they fight the case. And for some unknown reason, as I understand it, if we went to tribunal and we won, we get to nominate our own management. Yeah. If the freeholders won, we have to pay their expenses. They don't have to pay ours, which seems a very one-sided, lopsided way of doing things.
Probably goes back to the 1700s.
The second alternative is right to manage.
Mm-hmm.
You can go right to manage. If you get more than 50% of the owners sign up to it, you can go right to manage. We looked into that, and that again was going to end up costing us somewhere in the region of, we calculated, about £11,000 to go right to manage, although it should be a very simple procedure, and it isn't necessarily. Our leaseholders who are getting short leases and want to renew their leases are on average being asked to pay some in the region of £32,000 each.
That's quite a cost, Peter. Thank you very much for being so erudite about the difference between leasehold and freehold and giving some specific figures. £32,000 to do that. That's a remarkable thing. Have you had a similar experience? That's Peter in Maidstone, who saved his block of flats a lot of money by taking on the leasehold owner. The freeholder, in other words. What's your experience? Is a leasehold property better than no house at all? Vast majority of homeowners who bought a leasehold house now regret it. According to a new report, many feel they were actually missold it, and some are now struggling to sell up because of the consequences of having a leasehold property. Leaseholders can find themselves paying a lot of costs on the way through as well, a kind of ground rent with other costs that go with it. The National Association of Estate Agents, Property Mark, found more than half of homeowners said that they didn't realise what being a leaseholder actually meant until they bought a property. The government has previously said that developers have been increasingly selling houses on leasehold, adding to buyers' costs. What's your view? What problems have you faced as a leaseholder? Is it something that you regret doing? Maybe being a leaseholder is better than being no owner at all. Or do you feel that you're paying a mortgage and you're paying the rent, and so you're paying through the nose twice? Maybe you'd rather just rent a property and be able to be done with it at the end, rather than paying a mortgage and still having other bills on top. I'm a leaseholder, so I have those additional bills as well as my mortgage. Many leaseholders, I imagine, are in exactly the same situation. Maybe you bought yourself out of that and became a freeholder. Maybe you can give me an idea of the difference of how it feels if you've done both. And back to this core question, is having a property at all a luxury in the 21st century? Give me a call here at BBC Radio Kent, 0800 756 1111. You can text me on 81333, start your text with the word Kent. You can email me at lembit@bbc.co.uk. I want to know your views on this and get clarification about the difference between being a leaseholder and a freeholder. Here's somebody who might know the difference. One of the greatest financial gurus of his generation, David Braithwaite. David, good morning.
Morning, Lembit.
Good
morning.
Is that enough of a payment?
That's very good. Thank you very much. I'm very impressed.
I'm impressed that you're here as well on the usual fee, which sounds like free. So thank you very much for being here. So you're a freeholder on my show, or I'm a freeholder on your show, maybe. Let's start with the distinction between being a leaseholder and a freeholder. What is the difference?
So if you bought a house, you generally own the land underneath it and the air above it, so you can do what you want with that house whenever you want to do so. So that's quite straightforward. With a property such as a flat, you normally would have it on a leasehold basis, because if you imagine, like your previous caller there's a block of, say, 100 owners. What you don't want is the person above you playing the trumpet at midnight. You don't want somebody on the ground floor planting a tree that will then block out your light, and you don't want the person to the right of you painting their windows pink. So the lease, if you like, is almost like a book of rules to which everybody can live together peaceably. That is effectively what a lease is. Now, the confusion over these is that you get then ground rent and maintenance, which is what your chap was talking about, and you have management companies. But what's also been cropping up is lots of new home builders. This is people that have built retirement properties or new homes, and you think that they're freeholds. You look at it, you think that's a house. They've been setting them up as leasehold houses. And that's where a lot of the confusion started, because people are thinking, well, great, I'm not buying the flat with the lease on it. I've got my house, I could do what I want. They move in and then find out all is not quite what it was. So what's been happening is these new home builders have actually effectively been creating additional revenue streams for themselves by creating these leases on a house. And with these escalating ground rents and service charges, and every time you want to maybe put a conservatory on the back of your house, you have to ask permission, which costs you money, and so on and so forth. And people a lot of the time thought, well, I was buying a house, wasn't I? So why have I got all these rules? It's my property. And quite rightly, and they got banned the sale of freehold houses with leases on in December 17 because of this furore. The trouble is that about a third of the houses that were leasehold, properties that were leasehold in 2016, are these leases. So there's lots of people that are finding out when they're trying to sell or move, or they want to improve the property, or just getting bills through the door for rents that they thought, well, hang on a minute, where's this come from?
Well, so
they feel a bit missold.
That's, first of all, a salutary warning for those who who proceed in this way. But it leads to two obvious questions, David. The first question is this. Surely it says in the paperwork if it's a freehold or a leasehold.
It does. It absolutely does. But you have some legal companies that are probably more diligent than others. Also, when you're doing this, you're going through the property purchase invariably maybe with a mortgage. You get quite emotionally involved when you're going through the whole process of buying a home. So often these things are maybe missed. So people don't understand the significance or the importance of it till several years down the line when they get a letter through the door saying, you now owe us as your freeholder this amount of money. But also, it's how those ground rents escalate as well. Some of them every 10 years double. And they can do this for 50 years. So you can end up with thousands of pounds worth of ground rent on a property that you don't really control. So it becomes that your property is maybe not as saleable as what you thought it would be, but also not as mortgageable as it could be. So some large banks and building societies are reluctant to lend on these leasehold houses for the very fact that, well, actually, they're always assuming that you're not going to pay your mortgage, Lembit. So they say, right, if we have to repossess it, how quickly and easily can we sell this property? And the answer is, if it's a leasehold house, it won't be quite as easy as a standard freehold house.
This issue, I just want to return to this issue about freehold, leasehold. I'm still slightly confused how you can have a freehold property which is a leasehold.
That's exactly what happens. So you have it looks like a freehold property. So you'll look at it, it'll be a house where we know flats, won't be, number A and B. You'll have a number, a house name, whatever you want to have. But the builders, the developers have created a lease around it. So they effectively are saying, well, we still want to own a piece of this land for you. So that's what they're doing, and it's creating an extra revenue stream for those house builders to try and maybe keep hold of you for a bit longer, retain a degree of control, but above all, to try and make more money out of you at the end of the day. But that's how it is that they've done it. So they created leases. But you can, for many years, there have been other houses that have got leases. You get properties, for example, on National Trust land. So you own the house, but actually the land is owned by National Trust, and there's a lease there. That's something that's been around for quite some time, and there's lots of places in Kent that have got that. But this is where you bought a new build property invariably, and the house builder that you bought from is the one that then becomes your freeholder, and often unwittingly known to you, because if maybe it's the first time you're buying a new build house, it's the first time you built a property, how would you know all the ins and outs unless you're listening to a program like this, for example, because you're not the expert?
Well, BBC Radio Kent can save individuals a fortune, as you've proved in a previous show, if you remember that day. But on this occasion, surely if you have some legal advice, the lawyer could say, it's a house, but it's a leasehold.
Yes, and that's what they should be doing. So any conveyancer, when you're actually doing, and a conveyancer or a solicitor effectively takes the ownership of that property from the person that owns it now, which could be the builder or somebody who's an individual, and transfers that ownership across to you. But in doing so, the point of you paying for that legal representative to act for you is that they effectively are being delegated that responsibility to check through the paperwork and let you know exactly what the good and the bad news is about that property you're buying. So you go in with your eyes wide open. And anybody worth their salt would be doing exactly that and advising their clients appropriately. Sadly, maybe that doesn't always happen, or people get blinded by the rose-tinted glasses and thinking, we're buying a property, that's normal. And if you don't know it's not normal, how would you know? Because if you've never done it before, you don't know what you don't know. And that can be the difficulties that you then lumber with this property that you then struggle to sell, or you have escalating bills payable to the house builder.
Which leads to the second question, David. When one is buying a property and the options are a leasehold or a freehold, and you think that you really want a freehold, but you're not sure how to make the decision, does it mean that a leasehold is likely to be cheaper for a like-for-like property?
It probably will be, for those very reasons. On the other hand, though, if you're looking at buying a flat, then 99% of them are going to be leasehold, because you need to make sure that the people around you are all abiding by a common set of rules so you can live together. That's normal. It would be very unusual to have a freehold flat, and you probably never get a mortgage on it. Equally, if you've got a house that's leasehold, that is also now becoming, unfortunately was very rare, is now becoming more common. So there's nothing wrong with it per se, so long as you know exactly what you're getting yourself into, but above all, making sure that if you want to sell the property later, are you in a position to do that freely and ably so that you can move on and sell? You shouldn't be buying a dead duck, basically. You don't want to get the property you're spending a lot of money on. It's probably the biggest investment and purchase you're going to make. You need to make sure you get it right. And if you're not sure, Ask, and keep on pursuing those lines of inquiry with your solicitors until you get the right answers. And if in doubt, pull out.
How are you going to be able to determine how... I just simply don't understand how you can have... Let me start that sentence again, because I'm so shocked. You've got me briefly sideswiped there. How can you have a freehold flat if you've got 2 flats above you and 1 below?
That's why it's very rare, so you hardly ever find one. But you can sometimes get these freehold flats where it might be that you've got a shop underneath, for example, so that there's different ways the deeds can actually be laid out. But you can get freehold flats, but it's very, very rare. But what you can get, though, is a block of flats where the owners in the flats have a share of the freehold. So instead of having a management company, so I had a flat that I had some years ago. There was 8 of us in the block, and each of us owned an 8th share of the freehold. So we used to get together as a management company and decide who was going to do the gardening, who was going to wash the windows. So between us all, we could all establish what the costs were, unlike your previous caller that had a management company that was charging him the earth because the builder was, well, the landscape chap was coming from Enfield or something, wasn't it? So he had no control. For me, it's about knowing where you stand and having the degree of control that you need to have, but having your eyes wide open so that you know where you stand. The problem is that people, a lot of the time, only find out of this sort of events, or they find out how much it's going to cost after the event's happened. And then they're on an uphill battle to try and figure it out and then work out how they're going to pay for all these things themselves and the unknown costs as well that are involved. And it's legal. We don't all understand legal stuff, do we?
When I bought my house in London in 97, so that was 21 years ago, I think my lawyer insisted that I pay for a renewal of the lease. So it came with a 125-year lease. So I'm guessing that's 104 years to go. So I'll have to start worrying about that again when I'm 157. But why is that funny?
No, I just no. You're absolutely
you should be happy
right,
for me.
Yes, and of course we're all going to reach that age.
That's the right answer for the NHS. That'll be another phone in sometime. But that means that certainly for my life in that flat, even if I make it to 157, I probably won't live there. I'm probably going to be all right. But at what point, in your judgment, do you need to start thinking about renewing a lease? And can you do it before the lease is up?
You can do, yes. I mean, you need to get the collaboration of the other people in the block that live with you, because you'll need to work on it together. But generally speaking, I would say I would start to get a bit twitchy if it had less than 50 years left on it. Generally, from a mortgage point of view, is where a lot of people start to worry, because the mortgage companies usually want to have, say, 25 years left on the lease after the end of their mortgage is finished. So in other words, if you do a 25-year mortgage, they would expect to see a 50-year lease. Anything less than that, it gets tricky to find a mortgage company that will lend on it. But if you did find a mortgage company that would lend, you've then got to think about what I was saying earlier, which is then what if you want to sell because the other buyers might be trying to get a mortgage on it, and if you've got a short lease, it becomes tricky, so therefore the property value decreases. But you should look at extending leases, and lots of the new build flats now are all sort of 999 years, so there isn't really an issue. But a lot of older buildings around Kent and in London as well, they started with 99 or 125-year leases, which at the time felt like a long time. But it doesn't take long to start chipping away and realising your lease is getting shorter and shorter. And it's about doing it in plenty of time, because if you leave it to the last minute, then the freeholder, when you're looking to do this, might then charge you the earth to actually do it because they've got you over a barrel. So you need to be planning and preparing a lot of times for these sort of things and taking the right legal advice when you get there.
I follow what you're saying, David, because I'm a homeowner, but I didn't understand what you said when I bought the home, and so therefore I was quite vulnerable in a sense. Is it fair to say that as a leaseholder I have the worst of both worlds? I'm paying a mortgage and will be for another 15 or 20 years, at the same time as having to be a rentnik, in my case, to a local authority.
Yes, that's exactly what you are doing. So, but at the time, if you own a flat, especially in London where it's very expensive and a lot of times the only things people can afford in London is a flat, or indeed around Kent, then they will be a leasehold. But if you know what you're going into and you know that your ground rent might be only £10 a year and you all split the maintenance, it's very fair and reasonable. And also the solicitors, when you're purchasing, will go through and look historically at what sort of expenses the flats have all had to make sure that you're not buying somewhere that the roof's going to collapse in on, and that's why the person's selling it, and then you're all going to get lumbered with a bill. They should be able to check all of this sort of stuff out so that you know what you're getting into. There's nothing wrong with a leasehold flat, so long as the lease is long and you know exactly who the ground rent person is, the freeholder, and what the maintenance charges are. That's perfectly fine. The difficulty we have is when people have bought a house, then they found out that it's leasehold from a new build house builder, and they're paying escalating rents, and they're beholden to these people. Or you've got somewhere with a shorter lease on it, or you've got a freeholder like your caller did earlier on that was then being charged through the nose for some very sort of relatively basic things. But the good thing was that he did something about it. You know, you can do things about it, but it just takes time and often, unfortunately, money, which is not what everybody's always got to try and fight these things. And to find out more, how can individuals learn the difference between leasehold, freehold? Is your advice see a solicitor? Is it your advice go and see an independent financial advisor like yourself? It would be a conveyancer or a solicitor would be the person that would help you. So if you are looking at buying a property, but also the agent, if you're buying through somebody, should be able to sit you down and give you the basics on it. But frankly, as well, just even searching on the internet, if you just search the differences in there, but stick to a well-known site such as the gov.co.uk, you know, those sort of sites, or some decent property lawyers that you know of, and they'll all be happy to help you. And again, if in doubt, pull out. Don't buy something if you're going to be worrying about what you're paying for, and don't go in with your eyes wide without having your eyes wide open. Thanks so much. That's David Braithwaite, an authority on the difference between leasehold and freehold, saying don't buy if you're not sure, and don't go in with your eyes shut. Don't guess at it, is what David Braithwaite is saying. Did you take that advice? Did you get it right? Did you get it wrong? Were you lucky or unlucky? Are you a leaseholder or a freeholder? Maybe you don't want any of that, and you think that rental is the way to go because you don't want to be a mortgage slave. Give me a call. Maybe you've been caught out by this. Perhaps you bought a property with a short leasehold, and that meant that you realised you were going to have trouble later on in the purchase of the property and the ownership of it because its value would go down as the lease headed towards zero. The simple explanation that I've had today is, as a freeholder, you own your property, the bricks and mortar, and the land it sits on. As a leaseholder, you own the bricks and mortar, but not the land it sits on. You have a lease on the land. It might be 99 years, might be 125 years, as mine is. It might be 999 years, but you don't own the land if you're a leaseholder. That means you could be liable to ground rent. It could mean that you're also responsible for paying for a property management company. Have you been caught out by this? Is it easy money for the property managers to charge leaseholders if they have the opportunity to do so because you've signed on the dotted line? Were you careful before you bought? Or is it just something which is far too confusing at the point when you buy your first house? Tell me about your property purchasing decisions. Or maybe you said, I never want to be a slave to a mortgage. I want to be able to rent and be free in the same way. Leaseholds, freeholds. Is it better to have any kind of house and own it rather than be in a situation where you rent for the rest of your life? Though I know at least one pretty wealthy person who says he's determined to only rent because he never wants to be burdened by property. I wonder what you think. Let's speak to Louie Burns, who's Managing Director of Leasehold Solutions. Louise, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, it's Louie, actually.
Oh, sorry. You know what? I'm going to have to go back and get a new pair of glasses because it says so. That was all my...
I answer to anything, don't worry.
You should hear what I get called, but it's a family show. That aside, I can see my appalled producer, Caroline, thinking I've got to try harder here. I'm a professional, Caroline. Anyway, Louie, I got it right this time. Let's start by understanding what your job does. What does your organisation do?
So we're a group of companies that specialise in leasehold, helping leaseholders either extend their leases or purchase their freeholds of the building to be able to rid themselves of their freeholders once and for all.
So you are an organisation that could actually help someone like me, for example, who lives in a leasehold, to become a freeholder. To have a share. If you've got a flat, you would have a share of freehold. If you had a leasehold house and you bought the freehold, yes, you would be the freeholder of your home afterwards. So I live in a block of about 12 apartments. We would all have to agree to that, I presume. in order to make this
No,
happen?
there are some complex legal prerequisites, but the biggest one is that 50% of the flat owners in your block would need to agree to act at the same time. So half would need.
Okay. What happens to the other half? Do they just become slaves to us instead?
Well, hopefully not. What we do is try and encourage everyone to take part. And once you have a share of freehold with your neighbours, some people may not be in a financial situation, even though they have a desire to do this. And so at a later date, hopefully they will join. And eventually, our goal is always to have all leaseholders having a share of their own freehold.
Right, so you can help those who've got leasehold go to freehold. Incidentally, does anyone ever go the other way, from freehold to leasehold?
No.
Why not?
Because, I mean, if your limited company that owned the freehold went into administration, then the ownership would go back to the Crown, and a professional ground rent investor would buy it, and you would have a freeholder again. But it's very, very rare that happens.
Okay, so it tends to be a one-way street from leasehold to freehold. When you talk with people, what are the motivations to go from leasehold to freehold?
Well, the ones everyone's talking today about, the National Association of Estate Agents report that came out, and that highlights the abuses that are available to freeholders. So they have these different ways to make money from leaseholders. And leaseholders become tired of being a cash cow for freeholders. And so they want to rid themselves of that burden and take full autonomy over their own homes.
And when they do that, presumably there's a cost in the short term. Is it, in any material sense, better to be a freeholder rather than a leaseholder with a 100 or a 999-year lease?
The best, if you're talking about flats for a second, the sort of Rolls Royce of flat ownership is to have a flat with a share of freehold. Once you've been through that process, you're able to extend your lease up to 999 years and reduce your ground rent to zero. So that's considered the Rolls Royce of flat ownership, and that's what happens when you buy the freehold of your property.
Okay. Just for reference, and this is a totally selfish question, Louie, and I admit it, how am I doing with 104 years left on mine?
Well, the key pivotal date on a lease, singularly the most important date after it falls into zero, when the freeholder will kick you out and take possession of your property, is the 80-year mark. And so you need to know when your lease falls below 80 years, because on that day, officially, your property becomes a depreciating asset, and the cost of you extending your lease or buying your freehold will rise exponentially and continue to rise on a year-by-year basis. So you're 24 years away from that. But I would suggest when you are in around 86, 87 years, you should be looking to take some action or maybe sell the property.
This is so depressing. I'm going to have to do all of this in my 70s.
Yes. I was at a meeting yesterday with lots of angry leaseholders, and they were the same. They'd have to become pseudo-lawyers. They'd have to understand this ridiculously complex world of leasehold. And it is totally unfair that this should be the situation.
Why have we... I know I'm asking a series of random questions, but your answers are leading me there. Why have we got the situation in the first place?
Well, that's a very good question, because there are only a handful of countries in the world that have this leasehold system, which is effectively a perpetual land ownership system. Virtually everywhere else in the world, they have a form of common hold, and that means that when you buy the flat, you automatically have a share of the bricks and mortar, the land it sits on, with your neighbours, and there is no asset class that exists simply to make money from leaseholders. Why we still have this in the 21st century is unbelievable. It's a feudal system that dates back to 1066. And leaseholders have been complaining about this and trying to get rid of leasehold or make it fairer since 1884, when the very first serious debate was held in Parliament over it.
In 1066, if the other side had won, then would we have had freehold instead?
Well, all of Europe in the Middle Ages was feudal, but the rest of the world have moved to common hold. But in this country, we're stuck on this ridiculously inequitous system. And even now, the government have chaired legislation changes. They're promising to change this, but on the table isn't the fact that we should get rid of this completely, and that's what we need to do. We need to bring property ownership in this country into the 21st century.
The fact this goes back about 960 years and has some...
Maths, that.
But 962, but I didn't want to brag. That could be wrong. Now I've laid myself open to trouble there. But the fact that that's the case does suggest to me that there is a pretty deep-rooted political precedent in this country for the freehold versus leasehold situation. Now, coming back to the present day, then, if it is arcane, what would be a better system? What do they do else? And so in a common hold position, who loses out and who gains?
Well, shared living with people that you don't know in a building is never going to be perfect. And the freeholders in this country, they point to that to say it's never perfect. But we're not aiming for perfect. What we're aiming for is to remove an asset class. So, for example, it's considered that the very best form of this common hold is the Australian strata hold system. And there, the neighbours, they manage the building together. They make decisions because you have short-term maintenance like changing light bulbs and cutting the grass. And you may need to replace your roof in 15 years, so you're going to save up along the way. So they work together to manage their building. And the government provide assistance to them. They have education that's available freely. They have dispute resolution services. And so that is considered to be the very fairest property ownership system on what is essentially leasehold, multi-living.
Okay, then, if I'm thinking about buying a house now and I'm not trying to create an unusual situation, so let's say I'm a first-time buyer, I haven't got a huge income, and my options are myself and my partner, who maybe want to start a family, have three options. We've got rent, leasehold, and freehold. How do I make the decision? Is it based on finance or something else?
It's based on what is best for you. It's very important that the report that's out today is focusing on leasehold houses. And so it's important to realise that those houses were built as leasehold needlessly. They were built as leasehold to create an asset class so they could make money from leaseholders. So if you were looking at a leasehold house, for example, and lots of first-time buyers in the north of England are looking at that with the government's Help to Buy system, then it's imperative that the devil really is in the detail. It's what your ground rent is, when it doubles or when it increases, by what it increases. But the one thing, however much advice you can take, you can't factor in, is the fact of those licenses and permissions that are being charged up north. And unfortunately, the leases are worded to say the freeholder can charge you a reasonable amount for their permission to maybe build a conservatory in your garden. But there's no legal definition of what reasonable is. And so leaseholders find themselves in a position where they get charged a lot of money. And I've seen people being charged in Liverpool and Manchester £5,500 for permission to build a conservatory in their garden. And they have to either take legal action against their freeholder and go to tribunal, or just pay the money. So you need to look at your personal circumstances, what's best for you.
Could I challenge that in court by saying it's not reasonable?
You can. You have a legal right to challenge, and that sounds like that's an amazing thing that we have that legal right. But the reality of that is that you would probably need a solicitor. You would need to pay to apply to the first tier tribunal. Your freeholder would definitely have a valuer, a solicitor, and a barrister representing themselves. Their fees for fighting this are tax deductible, and your fees aren't. And so it's a David and Goliath battle constantly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your clarity of thought there. And if people want to find out more, what's the best way to do it, Louie?
Well, there's lots of advice online. There are two amazing organisations. One of them is called the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, who are a charity that give out free information. There's a Facebook page called the National Leasehold Campaign, and that's people power. And if you're a leaseholder that feels that you need to join up, you will have a big body of knowledge and people in the same situation as you. And anyone is free to contact us at Leasehold Solutions, and if we can help, we certainly would look at it.
Thanks so much, Louie. That's Louie Burns, Managing Director of Leasehold Solutions, who says you can contact them if you want more information, that there is information available out there. And the recurring theme from the experts this morning, do get professional advice, because the cost of that advice could well be much less than the cost of not getting that advice. Have you been caught out by a leasehold? Perhaps you have a freehold, but you'd rather have had rent instead. What's your situation when it comes to owning your property? And really, do you own it if you have a leasehold, knowing that every 100 or 99 or 125 or even 999 years, someone's going to have to renew the lease? Maybe you bought a property and you just didn't realise what it meant to own a property with a lease. Quite a few messages coming in as well. We're looking at this because the property that you buy is in most cases the very largest thing you will ever purchase in your life. And to get that wrong could be a big problem. Let's speak to Pam in Tunbridge Wells next. Pam, good morning.
Oh, good morning.
Where do you stand on this?
Well, I got so interested when I heard about when your 99, leasehold runs out.
99-year lease.
Well, you should renew it and all that. And I thought, oh, gosh, I am a pensioner now, so it probably doesn't apply. But it made me think about when you said cost. Recently, the town, I bought it through the housing group in Tunbridge Wells. I've just finished my mortgage a year ago, and I'm very pleased and chuffed that I managed it. And a letter's come through that they're going to do repairs outside. Now, my flat is just like a 4 flats, looks like semi-detached, so we haven't got any internal things to be done. But you don't know what they're going to do. Then I had a letter because I thought, well, I'm a leaseholder. Where does this apply? And it came back that you should start to budget now. And I thought, budget what for? Frightened you, What are they going to ask you for? Because rent payers won't pay anything, so that's in their rent. So anyway, it just made this gentleman you were speaking to, Louie, was it?
Yes, Louie Burns.
It just brought it all to my mind, of what, how much have I got a budget for? 500, a couple of thousand, or what? It's frightening.
Did they tell you? Did they tell you the
amount? No, they don't say that. No, they're just saying what they would do to... These are brick built where I live, so there's nothing much wrong with the thing. But they like boundaries and that. They will do that, but they'll put wiring up now, fair enough. But you've got to clear it to make sure. So I suppose that applies to wherever they go. Somebody's just having some done, but she's a tenant, so she's not worried about it. But they haven't come round to me yet, so I can't say. But it's a little bit worrying, when you get that. So I thought that was a little bit harsh.
So those who are renting are able to pay it as part of their rent, so it's included in what they're paying.
In there. It's included. It sounded like, that's part of the deal.
And because you own your property, you have to pay a kind of rent on top of whatever else you have to pay.
Well, we'll have to pay that. I didn't have time to look for the letter. Yeah. But, our ground rent is very cheap. I can't argue that. I couldn't go anywhere else and get it for the price that is. So that's one thing that's good. But it's just that frightened me, what they're going to find. The properties are solid, but and how much they're going to charge. I'd like to know roughly, would it be cheaper for me to pay for it myself, through people I know, that do it, or wait and see what they come. It's a big firm that's obviously doing the whole estate.
There was a problem in my apartment block of flats. Something went wrong with the roof. Yeah. And as a result, I was sent a message which said something about how there was going to be a bill coming, and it came to something like £2,300.
Yeah.
And it was unexpected. I hadn't got it in my budget. Do you think there's a better way of doing this, Pam?
Well, I wish I could have... I didn't know I was going to ring you. I was just in the kitchen. I always listen to Kent Radio, and I suddenly thought, oh, that applies to me. I will ring up and just see if, where would I go for about the leasehold sort of thing. He said below 88, you pay a lot of money to renew it, was it, or add on, or whatever it is. And he said if you get to 88 years, didn't he, on that bit? Yeah.
Yes, he said once there are fewer than about 85 years to go, 84, something like that.
yeah.
You need to start thinking about it. So I know that in my 70s, I'm going to start thinking about
That's what I heard you
the
say.
next
yeah.
lease,
I'm a
even
lot
though it's
older than you.
104 years. Well, I don't know. I'm feeling pretty old now, thinking
No, you're
about the
not.
fact.
No, you're not. I wish I was 10 years younger, but,
But
I'm
this,
fit, so don't,
but this means that I'm going to have to start thinking about my lease in my 70s, even though it doesn't run out. Wait for this till 2122. 2122. That's in the next century. I mean, my daughter will be 105 when my lease runs out, and I have to think about the lease in my 70s.
That doesn't make sense.
The world's gone crazy already.
Yeah, I hear what he said, because I remember a few years ago, I don't know, I heard someone say they were trying to get it that you could be freehold, all flats could, in the end, but I don't think it's happened, has it?
Are you still paying your mortgage?
No, I finished it last year,
You're a free woman.
and I was really quite proud of myself that I did all that on my own.
My neighbour's
It's a
just...
big thing to go into, but 25 years ago, I think it was 25. And I was a bit, can I do this? Do I do it? And I'm so glad I did,
My neighbour's just done the same thing. She has just finished paying her mortgage. She's called Sue. And she had a little celebration. It was in July, actually, 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And she says for the first time in decades, she feels free.
Yeah.
She actually feels free.
Yeah, go on.
If you got some kind of a freehold, then you could be even freer.
That's true. Yeah.
Are you
don't know what. Yes, because a little while back we got our gardens back onto a house, right? And they asked us to pay me, the elderly gentleman, who had the gardens at the back of ours, the front ones of the flat downstairs, and would we pay the money? And it was a lot of money. And I asked my son-in-law. Well, actually, in the end, we did pay. And I thought the other day, do you know what? We've paid for a third each. He's got the 2 bits his side. It should have been 2 quarters and him the half, in my mind. I thought, I didn't give a thought then. I took a long while debating it because it was money, quite a lot of money. But then I was told by somebody who works in where all the lease started, said you shouldn't have paid because you weren't freeholders. Well, the house was. So you felt a bit sick then, but never mind, that was done and that's gone. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that situation, it does feel like there are 2 classes of resident there, freeholder and the leaseholder.
Houses. Yeah. Houses all freehold. Yeah. We haven't got tall flats or anything. They're just a 2-storey. Look like semi-detached houses when you look at us. So they're quite nice.
It's all quite complicated, isn't it?
It is. But as I say, he made me think about it, which I haven't done. So that's given me food for thought, that. Yeah. I wonder, would we have thought about when it's about the budgeting, what his opinion would have been on that,
If you go back 20 years, would you do things differently?
No, I don't think so, no.
You'd still go for leasehold rather than freehold?
Well, I don't know about the leasehold. I didn't know much about that. I mean, years ago I had a house, our own house and that, but obviously that had to go when you get divorced years ago and went into, like you call it, council houses then, but they're not called council anymore. Yeah. But no, I never thought I'd have a chance to buy anything, that I could do it. And of course it was when they sold off, as Margaret Thatcher said, wasn't it? Sell off the council houses or something. Yeah, so I took the chance of it, not knowing what the future was and where you were money, but anyway, it worked out, so that was okay.
What's your advice on this question, Pam? Is there an argument to say that property ownership really is the preserve of the wealthy and the elderly because young people simply can't get on the ladder anymore?
No, yeah, I think that's very unfair. I mean, my own daughter tried for a mortgage, but they wanted 50,000 down, but she hasn't got 50,000. So that killed that idea, because you can still buy some properties through as a tenant if you've lived there 20 odd years or more and get a percentage off. And even with that, they still wanted 50,000 down. Whether she went to all mortgages, I don't know, because I thought, she said, I can't do it at my age. I said, I did, Sally Ann, so I shouldn't have said that to my daughter. I did it, so you could, but obviously it's more expensive now.
But on the continent, there is less obsession about owning property. Wealthy individuals with high incomes say, well, I'll just rent because I don't want to be a mortgage slave.
Yeah, that's true. And the way, I don't think I would have gone, I couldn't have done if mortgages had been high. Do you know what I mean? And no, the fact that you could buy at a price so cheap they were at the time. No end of people bought them, obviously. And, you wouldn't be able to get one for that price now. So it's, what would you get? The cheapest in Tunbridge Wells wouldn't be very cheap, because if you went for a flat that you need to pay for maintenance, that's about £300 a month for a lot of those are. The flat's cheapish, but I couldn't afford £300 a month maintenance. No way, no. Anyway, I should probably stay until the end of my days.
Well, that could be a very long time. You might certainly, if I stay till the end of my lease, I'll be moving out of my flat. I'll be living there till I'm 157, so that's quite a long time. But I'm still going to have to deal with it, even though my lease runs out when my daughter's going to be 104. So I can hardly get over that. I'm
going to get mine out and see actually how long I've got on it. Yes. I think it must be down to 80 or something. I'm not sure. But anyway,
that sounds comfortable.
Thank you for all your time.
Thank you, Pam. That's really helpful. Pam there, who's paid off her mortgage and is in a leasing situation and feels a little bit between owning her place and having to still be a kind of rentnik to some of the costs involving her house. What's your view? What's your life experience when it comes to owning property? Maybe you have always avoided it. You just don't want to own property. You don't see the point. You'd rather live a little bit better and pass through this world and shed your mortal coil without having the leftovers of mortgage, or without having spent 25 or 35 years paying off on a house which you can't take with you when you go anyway. You just bought it for somebody else by doing that. Or do you like the idea of having your own bricks and mortar and the land that goes on it? Are you a leaseholder? Are you a freeholder? Tell me your experiences. Maybe you got caught out. Maybe it's been horrible for you ever since you first bought a property and you wish you'd never even tried. 0800 756 1111. Text me on 81333. Start your text with the word Kent. Email me at lembit@bbc.co.uk. Lots of messages coming in. There's one here which comes from Carl. It says, if clients don't learn the difference between a leasehold and a freehold, I would say that there are some very, very awful solicitors at work. Thanks for that, Carl. Another one here, anonymous. Good morning, Lembit. Before completing a purchase, one avenue is to get the vendor to exercise his or her right to make a Section 42 notice to the freeholder for a new extended lease. Leaseholders can apply a right to buy freehold by forming a company with shares and negotiating a price, normally in the region of 10 years ground rent. So 10 years ground rent, if you're renting, in terms of leasing, multiply it by 10, that might be your one-off payment. Would that be something you could afford? 0800 756 1111. Just to explain what I did. I think it was a Section 42, where my solicitor arranged for the lease to be renewed at the time of the purchase of the property. So when I bought it back in 1997, I got a 125-year lease. So that means it'll be going all the way from 1997 through to 2097, plus 25 years on top of that. So it takes us, I think, to 2022, and already I'm being told that in my lifetime I'm going to have to try and sort out the lease on that. What's your view about property? Is it all too complicated? Is it far too easy to get caught out by all of this? For now, I'm asking if you think that leaseholds are a rip-off. Have you got a leasehold? Do you own a property but don't really feel you do, because you still have to pay rent on top of your mortgage? Maybe you've paid your mortgage off but wish, why, oh why, do I still have to pay all of this rent? When I felt that when I bought the mortgage, when I paid off the mortgage, I would have been a free person. I want to know that. Also, maybe you have a freehold and it's the best decision you ever made. How much did it cost you? Would you ever buy an apartment or a house which is a leasehold, or would you refuse to do it? 0800 756 1111. That's the number to call. You can text me on 81333. Start your text with the word Kent. You can email me at lembit@bbc.co.uk. Incidentally, if you want to know more information about this, you can find it on the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership website. The website's called Leasehold Knowledge Partnership. The Facebook page is the National Leasehold Campaign. or the Leasehold Solutions website. Those are three options there. Leasehold Solutions very kindly came on to the show this morning. That's Louie Burns, who's Supremo there. So those are three ways you can get information about what we're discussing. If you're thinking about buying a house or buying a freehold or selling your house or any of those combinations, 0800 756 1111 is the number to call. I'd like to know your stories, your experiences of buying housing and why you made the decision that you did. And would you make a different decision now if you had the chance? 0800 756 1111. Let's speak to Sally in Sandwich next. Good morning, Sally.
Oh, good morning. I was listening to your programme just in general. I personally don't agree with leasehold. I would never buy leasehold. I never have. So our properties have always been freehold. And that decision was made on the knowledge that in part that property is never yours, fully paid up, ever. And on that basis, we always bought freehold. But what actually caught my attention was when you were speaking to one of the ladies who called in, and she said, you asked her, do you think selling off social housing, that all came into it, and it is making it more difficult for young people to get onto the housing ladder? Mm-hmm. Well, I get really cross with that, really cross. I am absolutely certain there are some young people who have, do, and possibly always will find it terribly difficult to be able to buy their own home. And I look to government to try to help them with that. But there are also an awful lot of young people who say they can't get onto the property ladder, but are not prepared to go without, to save up, to do what we used to do. When we were saving for our deposit, I know it was many years ago, we used to go out once a week to our local pub and we used to have half a pint of beer between us. We didn't go on holidays, we didn't go to concerts, we didn't do anything because we could not afford to save for a deposit for our home and do all these other things. Now, I know because of the interaction I have with some young people that some of them go on holiday 2 or 3 times a year. They go to this place and that concert, and the other, which cost a fortune, I think. And then they're moaning because they can't get on the property ladder. They go and spend thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds on getting married, which is totally unnecessary. You can do it for a few hundred if you want to, but then complain that they're not able to get on the housing ladder. That is down to them because they're not prepared to do the work and go without to reach their goal. And so I don't want to help those ones. I only want to help the ones who really do want to help themselves and are in a really difficult position.
But everybody is in a difficult situation now compared to the cost of housing in the past, aren't they, Sally? Because I remember my parents bought their first house. I just remember this from the 1960s because they told me in the 70s they spent £4,500 in their first house. They sold it for £12,000 in 1975. Well, you can't do that now. They sold up in Northern Ireland, but when we moved to England, for about 37,000, and I would imagine that house is worth about $500,000 now because the area suddenly became posh. And there's no way that my family could have afforded £500,000 for a house.
No, but that is how things happen to have evolved. But other things have evolved as well, like the level of pay, for instance, like all the things that people expect to have as their right. They want this, they want... When we moved into our little flat, we sat on orange boxes because we didn't have the money for anything else. My parents bought us a bed and my husband's parents bought us a little fridge, and that is all we had in that house, in that property. That is all we had. But we were as happy as Larry. We didn't need all this stuff that they apparently all need today. And if they don't have it, they feel they're hard done by.
But in the past, the ratios really were different. I can't remember what the ratio was. Maybe the cost of a house was 3 times or something like that, your annual salary, something like that. Now it could be 7 or 8 or 10 times. There's no way I could afford to buy my apartment in central London now because I bought it 21 years ago. Yeah. Even then it seemed expensive, but it's just laughable now.
Yeah, but in central London, it is a totally different scenario because I could turn around and say to you, you could go up to a northern town and buy a terraced house for 20,000. That doesn't mean to say that's what you want to do or that's what you should do, but that's what you could do. We didn't want to move from where we grew up when we got married, but we couldn't afford to live there.
Thanks for your call, Sally, who does say that you can still get cheaper property in the north of England. I happen to be looking out of interest, and she is, of course, right. So maybe the answer is we should be a bit less fussy about where we live and a bit more fussy what we live in. Do keep your calls and comments coming on this. What's your view about the property market? Is it unaffordable? Have we been priced out of buying property if we're first-time buyers? Or should we stop complaining, tighten our belts, as Sally in Sandwich says, and just get on with it because we can be happier for less? Maybe you don't really care for property in the first place. I'd like to know your views. Would you change the decision you made? Would you only buy a freehold now when you own the land as well as the property that is sitting on it? Or would you be happy with leasehold? Maybe you just don't care about any of this. You just rent, you're happy, you've had a good life with it, and you don't want to be a mortgage slave. Maybe that gives you a freedom that property owners don't have. Maybe they get trapped by their bricks and mortar. A few messages here on that question. First of all, Miles from Ashes make the good point. I was trying to guess how many years it was since 1066, mainly because we were talking about property prices and property arrangements and the Battle of Hastings. And Miles says, and I'm reading this out of humility, Miles, Lembit Opik was right not to brag. It was 952 years ago since 1066, not 962 as he said. Miles, you're right. I actually did an A-level in maths. I got a B, but I didn't get any of the actual answers right. I got the workings right, but I got the answers wrong. So you've exposed something I did in 1983. I've got a message here from Martin in Hythe. Good morning, Lembit. It's a fundamental right for every man and woman to be able to own completely their own home. It's unbelievable that in the 21st century, a system dating back to the feudal system should still exist. All property should be freehold, and existing landowners given a specific finite time to sell the freehold to existing leaseholders. Management companies are an anachronism. They are out of date. Thanks for that, Martin. Another call there for the abolition of the idea of leaseholding. I wonder what you think. 0800 756 1111. Here's another message, anonymous, but definitely very important. Before completing purchase, one avenue is to get the vendor to exercise his or her right to make what's called a Section 42 notice to the freeholder for a new extended lease. Leaseholders can apply a right to buy freehold by forming a company with shares and negotiating a price normally in the region of 10 years ground rent. So there's another possibility as well, a Section 42. I'm not a great expert on that, but I do know that something like a Section 42 was exercised when I bought my flat. It's only a little flat, but apparently I was certainly persuaded by my lawyer at the time to do it. So there seems to be some sense in that. Let's speak about this in the following way. The core question is: leasehold better than freehold or worse than freehold, and is it worth having property at all? I'm just wondering if you look at it like that, incidentally, whether you have a choice. Perhaps you find a house which is absolutely perfect for you, and it just doesn't happen to be a freehold stroke a leasehold as you want. And if that's the case, is wanting to have one or the other of those so important to you that you would actually sacrifice your preferred kind of holding just to have the property? Maybe you have done that. Maybe you hoped you'd change it later and you never did. 0800 756 1111. Text me on 81333. Start your text with the word Kent. Let's speak to Lynn next. Lynn, good morning.
Good morning.
You're from Cumbria.
I am, yes, up north.
Is that in Scotland or Iceland?
No, not quite Scotland, nearly.
Well, welcome to the show. Are you phoning? Are you phoning from Cumbria? Or are you down here?
I am. No, I'm phoning from Cumbria.
Oh, thank you. That makes us a virtually international show.
Absolutely, yes.
Do you have houses up there?
I have a house, yes, which I purchased off a major developer in September 2016. And it's a leasehold property on an estate that is now a mixture of leasehold and freehold, although they're not true freehold.
So you bought wait, hang on, there's a weasel word. What do you mean not true freehold? What is the actual situation? Well, the developers and the one that I'm with and all major developers actually market these properties as freehold, but they actually have estate management charges attached and lots of other onerous fee earning clauses which are attached to a document called the TP1, which many buyers are not aware of, and particularly first-time buyers. So they are actually marketed as freehold, but when they actually sign up to these these purchases, and then when the developer moves on to the next phase, or indeed off the development, they hand over then the rights for the management to a management company, of which there are various. And that's when the troubles begin, because in my instance, I signed my reservation agreement, which was stated £100 per annum. So it was quoted from the sales office grass cutting. And actually, my first bill that I received off my management company was for £308 pro rata, which included fees for postage, repairs and renewals, directors and officers insurance, public liability insurance, etc. I still today have not got any accounts from this management company stating where these charges came from. So in effect, I was paying my fees tripled in year one, which I am on a very small property, the smallest terraced house that the developer makes, and I bought this house for the cheap running costs as well as my affordability. And what I don't want people to do, your listeners, is to go into the new development thinking that they are buying a true freehold and thinking that these fees, okay, yes, it's a fee to pay for these maintaining the green spaces, but these are unregulated at present. Until the government intervenes, it's a cash cow for the developer. Let me check the frequency of payment. You said it was going to be £100 over what period? A month, a week, a year? It was, on my reservation agreement, it says £100 per annum. So you expect obviously a little bit of inflation with that, but my bill for this year is £260, and includes a parking court charge, of which, even though the parking court is deeded to my property, they just make these fees up as they go along. They are so unregulated, and I want people to be aware that the transparency of this is not. When you go to the sales office, they do not tell you this, and you don't find out until it's far too late, until you've already purchased. It could go up even further. We had an earlier call from somebody in the business who said that the phrase reasonable is very hard to contest. So they could add a nought onto that and say, I'm afraid it's £2,500 a year now. Yeah. And the thing is as well, sorry to interrupt you there, because I didn't hear the earlier stories, but and in my case as well, I sent a cheque this year, and fortunately for me, I sent it recorded, signed for. The company sent me a court summons saying I hadn't paid and a late payment charge. So when I rang them up and challenged them about this, they were adamant and were quite curt with me on the phone until I told them that to check this number and her signature. And miraculously, a couple of days later, my cheque appeared. And it makes me wonder just how many people have been caught out by that as well. They seem to be wanting to make money in any which way form they can to just fleece people. Well, they're a business. They're not a charity. They would say to you, Lynn, we'll get as much out of you as we can. And that's just the way life is. That's fair enough on that, but the clarity should be at the point of sale. These developers should not be selling, in my view, they are mis-selling these properties when they're setting these fees so low. There should be transparency to say that your fees should be, they start off with this, but, they are unregulated. And what I want your listeners to know is whoever is thinking about buying a new build property, go in there and
be aware that these fees are not set by any means. They are totally unregulated, and be prepared to pay into the thousands as it could take, depending on what's on their estate and what's on their TP1 agreement.
You don't sound very embittered. You sound slightly embittered by the fact that you feel that you've been, don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you feel that there's been some sharp practice.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've got proof, I've got evidence to prove all this as well. I've had letters of apology from the management company in question and the developer with promises that next year this will be no more than this, and that's been totally roughshod, so I just don't believe a word they say to them, and that's what I would say to your listeners. Do not believe a word the sales office tells you, and also, and this is very, very important, use your own LEP registered solicitor who can actually go through all these clauses and make sure that they are working for you and not for the developer.
What's an LEP?
They are associated, they're specialist leasehold, and this is not just what people have got to remember is even though these are freehold houses, they still have these onerous fee earning clauses. So they have to go in somebody who's a property specialist, and these LEP registered solicitors are basically property specialists, not just your general run-of-the-mill conveyancing solicitor, because this is why mistakes have been made. And again, this needs to be regulated by the government.
And if you put all that together, Lynn, it could be argued you're onto losing wicket as soon as you sign for a leasehold, because you're going to be beholden to the leaseholder, the leaseholding agency, in other words, or the freeholding agency. Let me get that right. The freeholder will lease it out to you and can do more or less what they want, and they can use it as a license to print money to an extent.
Yes, definitely. I mean, and to some degree as well, as the law stands at the moment, you actually have more rights as a leaseholder than you have as a freeholder, because as a leaseholder, you can at least apply for the right to manage, and you can go to tribunal, albeit a lengthy and, process and costly process. If you buy leasehold, i.e. freehold with the TP1 attachment on these private, managed with management charges, then you've got no comeback whatsoever. You are tied in that. It's like a ball and chain. And for young families and people who are stretching themselves with mortgages as it is, to have these extra charges on top of their full council tax, it is just too much. It's not fair. They should at least be aware of that to make the informed decision at point of purchase.
Maybe instead of calling them leaseholds, they should be called fleeceholds.
Definitely, that's what I call them, yes.
That's what I thought you'd said.
Yeah.
Take solace. Which part of Cumbria are you in, Lynn?
I'm in Penrith.
Penrith, beautiful place. Yeah. And I've got a friend, know the local MP or one near there, Tim Farron.
Yeah, all right.
And I know him as well.
Yes.
One advantage you've got, though, advantage and disadvantage, in the less touristy areas, you've definitely got lower house prices than Kent. But the problems in terms of leaseholding seem to be very similar there as they are here in our county down here.
Yes, it is actually. It's like a cancer, is this? It has spread. I mean, it has spread into Cumbria, and I was probably the first person who became aware of this and decided to join the National Leasehold Campaign and the Hornet, which are both available on Facebook for people if they want to look at these. To see what share stories and to support each other, because we need to stop this and we need to make people be aware so at least they know what they are buying into.
Do you regret buying the leasehold?
Absolutely. I regret buying into leasehold. I would certainly not buy a freehold #leasehold property on a new estate with any estate management charges. Definitely not, no. Until this government decides to change the law and to regulate and to abolish leasehold, then I would advise anybody to look elsewhere and buy a true freehold property and do it up if they can. And, everything needs to be looked into, including the government-funded Help to Buy as well, because I believe abuses have been committed.
That's Lynn in Cumbria, listening to us from up there and sharing the fact that the issues that they have up there are very similar to the issues we have down here with leaseholds and with freeholds. Very interesting to hear that cross-section of issues and a certain degree of weariness with leaseholds, suggesting that those who have them, including myself perhaps, don't feel entirely like we own our own property because we don't own the land on which the property is built. Thank you for all your calls and comments on that.